Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So good to have you with us in our study of Genesis chapters 10 and 11. And we'll be looking at the foundation for false religion and one world government that are being set there at the Tower of Babel. Now, as we looked at Genesis 9 and 10, we saw that there was a curse placed upon Canaan, who was a Hamite, and from Ham also came a man named Nimrod, and he is mentioned in chapter 10. And a lot of times when people come to genealogies, which are important, by the way, for many reasons, but when you come to the genealogies, people tend to skip over them, and it's almost like God said, you skip over this, you're going to miss something. And I'm going to put something in there that's very key for you. And he always does that in the midst of those genealogies like that. And there are two clues in Genesis chapter 10 that you dare not miss. And I'll take them in the reverse order. I'll take the clue that occurs second first, because it's easier to dispense with, and I want to spend more time on the second clue. So the first clue in chapter 10 that's kind of dropped in the midst there is found in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 25, when it says, 2 sons were born to Eber. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, the earth was divided. What in the world does that mean? I've heard two theories that have been given. One has to do with the continents were divided, and the other one was that the languages confused the people, and the earth was divided from that standpoint. When I was a younger man, I was kind of enamored with the idea that the earth was divided and the continental drift and all that sort of thing. But as I have studied the context, pardon me, and I see the flow of the text in chapter 11, where then you have the Tower of Babel, and then the languages are confused, and then the earth the languages cause the people to go where their affinity of speakers are, and they're divided that way. The context seems to fit that better. And so in the flow of the biblical text, chapter 11 speaks of the division of the people of the earth at the Tower of Babel. Some find this confusing of languages hard to believe. They were working together, and all of a sudden somebody say, "Wie geht's mit mir?" And somebody else says, "Ich wist tombalasha," and they don't understand each other. And those are two languages, by the way, that I happen to know a little bit of. And so they didn't understand each other. And so as they were talking, there might have been a couple people coalesced that talked a Germanic language, another one Italian language or Asiatic language, and they kind of coalesced around each other, and there was a mass confusion. Some people find that hard to believe, but the reverse of it was done on the day of Pentecost. If you look at Acts chapter 2, pardon me in my coughing here, Acts chapter 2, and the day of Pentecost, Penta meaning 50, and you counted 7 weeks and then a day, and that's when that celebration occurred. And so it was on the day of Pentecost, and it says here, and there appeared, verse 3, there appeared tongues as of fire distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them, the disciples, and they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak with other tongues, languages, as the Spirit was giving them utterance. Now there were Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound occurred, the crowd came together and were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. They were amazed and astonished, saying, "Why are not all these men who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear them in our own language, to which we were born?" There were Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, and Phrygia, and Pamphylia. Egypt is number 11. Districts around Libya, 12. Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. So you're looking at here 16 or 17 languages right there, and they were all hearing and they were all amazed. And God did it like that. And so everybody was hearing in their own languages. And these people were just immediately, by a miracle of God, caused to speak in a language they hadn't learned. Reverse of Pentecost. And God did it back at that time, too. And only this time it was permanent. And they spoke in this language that just suddenly started coming to them. That's clue number 1, setting up this chapter 11 of the Great Division. Clue number 2 was about a man named Nimrod. And we see this in verses 8 through 12. 4 verses on him when everybody else just gets a little sentence. Even Peleg only gets a sentence. But all of a sudden, he is an important dude. And it says, "Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth." Now that word mighty one, Gibor, is thusly translated as mighty man or warrior, champion or hero. And so you can be a mighty man, a big man, a man who is a fighter, a man who is a warrior, a man who does great things. And so he becomes a mighty one on earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, there are various theories I heard about this. And what might have been was that after the flood and these dinosaurs that were on the ark and other creatures began to get bigger and bigger and more troublesome. And as they got that big and they perhaps were difficult in some way, perhaps even eating humans, the Bible anticipating that an animal might be harmful to a human being said if an animal kills a person, then that animal must have its life taken from it. Trouble is, some of these animals might be tremendously ferocious or tremendously large. So it takes somebody who really knows what they're doing, who has courage, great skill, or is able to motivate a gang of men to go and hunt this animal. And they might have spears, and they might have bows and arrows, and nets, and all kinds of ways in which they trap this animal and dispense with it. And so people wanting protection from these great animals would see anybody who could do this as a benefactor, and they might coalesce around this person for safety's sake, and also might give maybe up some freedoms for the safety that they could get. And so there becomes a symbiotic relationship, and the great hunter becomes more like a king or something like that. And this is plausible. It's plausible. So he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Now this is the first mention of any kingdom. And so he has a kingdom now, Babel, which later on becomes Babylon, but it's where the Tower of Babel was erected, and there was also Erech and Akkad and Kolna. So there's 4 cities, and then the land of Shinar. From the land he went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh, and Rehoboth, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. Now you might notice some of those major cities, Babylon and Nineveh. Those were great cities, and there was a warrior cult that grew up around these cities, and they would go and capture people and enslave them or make them pay tribute. They would take what they want. They enriched themselves. They made their cities practically impregnable. Pardon me. And so he was able to have a kingdom. Now, his founding of 8 cities. Incidentally, how many cities have you founded? Just to kind of make you think, this isn't an easy thing to do. And there was building that was involved. Babel, they fired their bricks. When I was in Africa, boys that wanted to go to camp, they said, well, make some bricks. And so they'd go and they'd put dirt in a press, and then they would press that dirt, compact it, and then take the brick out, and then they'd lay it in the sun, and then that would become an adobe brick for making walls or even buildings. But the one thing about those bricks were that it was just dirt, and if it rained, and it would most likely rain, those bricks would dissolve. They would erode. But if you could fire them, they would become resistant to erosion, and they were better building material. And so these people had a way of firing their bricks, and they had a way of locking them together with a tar mortar type deal, and so they were quite skilled. And Nimrod was able to build these cities and have some type of warrior cult come up around him. So this is a clue to something that is coming, and it's very important for mankind. Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, and making a kingdom, his name would be up there, perhaps even surpassing Alexander the Great and also Genghis Khan. And he was able to build. He was the first one that came up with this. And you wonder sometimes, how is it that this particular man, Nimrod, was able to come up with deciding to make a kingdom? This is the first kingdom, a warrior cult, and dominating other people and going against what God had commanded. How did he come up with that? Well, he might have had a little help, if you know what I mean. Might have been satanic thought being introduced into his mind, temptation, whatever. And so this is something where they didn't want to scatter, not doing what God wanted to do. Let's all concentrate in one spot and make a name for ourselves. Let's not go with what God wants. Let's read the text in chapter 11. Now the whole world used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east, and you probably ought to think of that in terms of they went south and east from the mountains of Ararat. Men just migrated slowly over this way. And so, as they journeyed east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower, whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." So they didn't want to do what God wanted them to do, scatter and migrate and spread out. They wanted to concentrate, and they wanted to become dominating. And the translation where it says, "And let us build a tower with its top in the heavens," could be translated that way. The word that translated for heaven is the word, it's plural, and it could be translated plural. And there's a lot of things in the Bible that people assume they understand, and when in reality, it says more than what they realized. For instance, when it says, "And from your seed, or the seed of the woman, shall come the one who will have his heel bruised, but he will step on the serpent's head." Now, that from the seed of the woman, people assume that there was a man involved because that's the normal way in which it is, but that allows for the virgin birth. But that, even though it's there in kernel's truth, it's not something that's readily apparent. And so there are things in the scriptures that become more and more clear. And although they may have misunderstood the passage back at that time or thought they understood it, doesn't mean that we're locked into thinking that that's how the interpretation must be because that's how they understood it back at the time. No, there are languages and things in that allow people to see more than what they now see, then had seen. Let us make man in our image. I had an argument with somebody just recently and said, well, that is a majestic we. Let us make man in our image, or whatever. We are not amused. But even when you say we are not amused, like Queen Elizabeth, who just passed away, we are not amused. Well, she at least has a plural verb with that, we and are. But if she said we is not amused, you'd say, what's going on with this? And that's what it is in the Hebrew. It's plural. Elohim is gods, but it takes a singular verb when it is in reference to Elohim, the God up in heaven, but it's a singular verb. And that allows for one God, but there could be a plurality in them. It's there. And so when you say, well, God had it set up that way, and they just got used to saying we is all the time, and the truth of the matter is, it's like a stop sign that says there's a little bit more than you're considering here. And there's another passage I could go to. Oh, I could just keep going on. This is one of those passages where it says, "And let us build a tower whose top is into the heavens." Now, they weren't going to get all the way up into the starry hosts and to where God's realm is. They weren't even going to be able to get to the second heaven. But they said heavens, and that allows for that. Their idea was that they not only wanted to have a tall tower and just say, try to flood this out, God. They wanted to have a tower, a high tower, but they wanted to have a tower that somehow or another would shake its fist in the face of God and rival heaven. And they weren't going to do what God wanted them to do, and they were going to make a mecca, so to speak, of religion that went a different direction from what they wanted them to do, what God wanted them to do. And so this literal rendering up into the heavens, this literal rendering allows us to see a rivalry that they were intending with the third heaven. False religion was being set up to divert people away from God. Oh, don't listen to that. Listen to what our faith says. And this made them more easy to manage and to unify for the government. So false religion and the government work hand in hand. It goes on to say here, the Lord, verse 5, came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have the same language, number 2, and now nothing which they purpose, common purpose, to do will be impossible for them. One language, one people, and one purpose. And so to counteract what they were trying to do with a religion that went in the face of what God wanted them to do, and they had a common language, and they were one people, government, he confused their languages. So that now instead of a one world government, you have many governments that have competing interests. The people are not united, and they don't speak the same language. Now, you say, well, Pastor, that's kind of a lot to swallow. You're getting all that from this here? No, not all that from this here. There's a passage in the New Testament that you have to wait almost 4,000 years for, from when this was written. More like, 1,800 years. And that will tell you something in the commentary back on this passage. We're going to look at that now, and you'll see why I'm headed the way I was with this passage. Revelation chapter 17. Now it says here, talks about a woman, and this woman is symbolic of religion. That earlier in the book of Revelation, I think it's chapter 12, there are a vision of two women. One was with child, and she had the 12 stars and the sun and the moon, and that's from a symbolic passage that pointed to the nation of Israel. And she was going to give birth to a child, and Satan was going to try and kill that child. And then there's another woman that they talk about. And this woman is the woman that's the Scarlet Woman. And the Scarlet Woman is kind of like a prostitute or a harlot. And so it's talking about her. And it says in verse 4, the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, royalty, really decked out, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup, full of abominations, and of unclean things of her immorality. So she might have looked really like something, but she was very, very bad and sinful, wicked, kind of a Jezebel. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, which is something that had not been known until it was revealed. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. That means the mother of harlots means that it was the origin of where this harlotry and false religion came from, and the abomination of the earth. And so this is a commentary way, way, way back to the Tower of Babel and the false religion. And you know, when they got scattered and it went over there, all of a sudden now you have these ziggurats, towers, that are being built in different countries because they took that religion with them. You'd have the Incas, and you'd have the Mayans, and you'd have those that were in Asian countries, and then pyramids of Egypt, not exactly the same thing, but at least it was kind of the idea bound up in their gods. And the Greeks, they were more lazy about building towers, so they just worship up on top of the mountains, Mount Olympus, and all that sort of stuff. But uh, so this false religion was proliferating all over the place, you see, although they had different languages. And so it says in verse 6 here, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. Well, I don't like the sound of that. Somehow or another, this false woman, false religious woman, was persecuting and killing the saints, and with the blood of the witness of Jesus. So it's very specific. It's not just talking about Jews here. It's talking about Christians, which may not be Jewish. And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So the Scarlet Woman is riding on a beast, you see, and they kind of are in cahoots. So the harlot represents false religion, anti-Christian, by the way, and Babel is the mother or start of it, the mother of harlots. And one world government and its companion of false religion are fighting through the confusion of the languages. You know, I had occasion to have my eyes checked. I have to have them checked periodically because of my diabetes. I know people that have trouble with the possibility of losing their vision, and so they, as a matter of course, tell you to have your eyes checked from time to time. And then they look back in there with a bright light, and they tell you how you're doing and whether you're bleeding in the back of your eyeball or something like that. I was fine, by the way. But in that office, as I was waiting, I got to talking with a man who had done some selling of heart mechanisms, stents, and various other things. We talked about artificial hearts and stuff. It was a real interesting conversation. But he said he sells all over the world. And I said, oh, really? How many languages do you speak? He says, I just speak English. Everybody learns English so that they can trade. And, you know, it's interesting. That stuck in my mind. And somebody says, what do you call a person who only knows one language? I say, well, an American. But the truth of the matter is, English is becoming the world language again. And everybody wants to learn English so that they can do business. Where the Tower of Babel is reversing itself, and so you're getting a language that's all the same now again. And there are efforts to try and have one world government. These huge corporations that are worth more than the gross domestic product of some of these countries. They're trying to get it so that they can trade and freely go back and forth and not have restrictions and be interfered by the various countries. And they just say we're all one world, and they're trying to get it this one world government going. There's a lot of forces that are being involved in there. And right now we see a nationalism that's going countering that because that's how God set it up. And there's a natural force against wanting to become a one world government through nationalism and people speaking different languages and being different peoples. They're all still human. But there's going to come a time by the use of religion and somehow or another working through the languages. There's going to be a one world government again, and Satan is going to be at the pinnacle of it through the Antichrist. It says here in verse 8, the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction, and those who dwell on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. So there is this relationship with the beast and the government he runs and the harlot. And I'm going to tell you that he has a death, and somehow or another he comes back to life. And when he does, he wants to claim deity, and he wants everyone to worship him, and he wants to get rid of every religion and it all be focused upon him, so that now religion serves the purpose of focusing everybody on him and on one world government, and he wants to reign in the entire world. And there are going to be 10 horns. Verse 12, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. That doesn't mean literally 60 minutes, but just a short time. Might be a couple years. These have one purpose. One purpose. Where have you heard that before? Way back in the Tower of Babel, they had one language. They were one people, and they had one purpose. Now, nothing was impossible for them. And but you know, God saw this coming. As a matter of fact, he wanted to allow it to happen. If you look farther, these will wage war against the Lamb. They want to be against Jesus Christ. And the Lamb will overcome them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And if you look here at verse 15 in Revelation 17, and he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Okay? And the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these will hate the harlot. You know, there's an uneasy alliance. They want to get rid of her now, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose. Now he's ready for one world government by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. And he comes down, as it says in Revelation 19. It says in verse 1, after these things I heard something like a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven saying, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous, for he has judged the great harlot who was corrupting the earth with their immorality. And so then he comes and riding on a white horse as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So my friends, the King of Kings will exalt over the great harlot and the Antichrist. You can read about that in Revelation 19. And it says that those whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life, written before the foundation of the world. My friends, you want your name in that book. And what you need to do is place your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Get your name in that book.